everyone, it's Allison. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be making this set of cards using the Spellbinders Layered Christmas Stencils collection. As I was making this set of masculine cards, I was running across some issues or little blips that I thought, let's create a video sharing tips for successful stenciling. I was also testing out new colors, which is great to do with stencils. So let's get started by introducing this first set. This is the Layered Noel Foliage Stencil and Die Bundle. There's a matching die that cuts out the word. There are 6 stencils, 2 of which create the word with a shadow. And the first tip I have is hold your stencils in place. For me, I'm using one of my new Waffle flower grip mats, which holds the paper in place and then it holds the stencil in place on top of it. I have an A2 sheet of paper right here, and this stencil you can see is not that much bigger. This is a fairly small stencil, but I'm testing it on the sides and you can see it is gripping to my mat. So I'm gonna go with it. And the great thing about having something that holds your stencil in place is you don't need to use your other hand to hold it. It just makes for, number one, a much easier stenciling experience, and more importantly, a more enjoyable, to me anyway, experience. And obviously frustration free, because if your stencil shifts, you have to start over. And so it's just nice. Whether you use a grip mat or you use tape, you can tape your paper to the back of the stencil. You could use a bigger sheet of paper and then tape your stencil to the paper. Whatever you do, just do something that works best for you. So here I'm laying on my second stencil. And there are little hash marks on these stencils for an A2 panel, and I'm lining it up with that, but it's also easy to line up because some of these floral elements kind of fit together. Like there's a little branch, and then the second stencil will have the flowers on top of the branches. So it's really easy to line these up. And you'll see later in this video, these stencils are marked with numbers, but for me, a lot of these layering stencils, it doesn't really matter if you go in order. Like if you do number 2 stencil first before 1, is usually just fine. So here's the third stencil. And by the way, for this card, I am using this little set of brown inks from Simon Says Stamp. These are their new saturated ink cubes that they just started releasing a couple months ago. So this is like a nice set of warm, I would kind of call it a warm grays. So now I've come in with a smaller blending brush. And we're going to breeze through a lot of the stenciling because, most of it is just basic stenciling. So I am finishing up with this stencil, and by the way, each stencil I get progressively darker with my colors. So I use the lighter color of ink for the first stencil, then the second color of ink. All right, mask off sections of your stencils. We're now at the stencil that has the word, and even regardless, if you have a stencil and you want different parts of that stencil to be different colors, go for it. I personally use tape to mask off certain areas of my stencil so that I can do that. And right here, I'm just kind of marking off where the word is so that I don't get this color where the word is. I really wasn't sure what color I wanted the word to be. Here I am coming in with this even tinier brush for these tiny little areas in here. You don't have to have all these size brushes. I just happen to have them, so I find them to be helpful. So I'm going to continue using this detail round brush for the bigger parts, and then I'll come in with this waffle flower tiny little brush for just these tiny little dots. So I didn't have to tape off all the sections because I was using that tiny brush and I knew that I wouldn't get ink where I didn't want it. All right, beware of the flippity flappities. And this is a technical term. I looked it up in the dictionary. Some stencils have delicate parts. You see me lifting this flap in the L. So you can use pixie spray to hold your stencil to your paper, but I chose to risk it. I thought, I see where the flap is. I'm going to be okay. So what I didn't do is I didn't pay attention to the little flippity flappy on the O and the E. But I'm going to show you how I handled the one that I knew about. When there's something delicate like that, go with the grain. It's like you wouldn't sand wood against the grain. So you're not going to stencil against the little flippity flappity. You're going to go with it, if that makes sense. I'm going to stencil in the direction of the flap. Otherwise, you would just lift the flap up. And here you can see the O and the E. That's what happened. I got ink underneath the stencil because I wasn't being careful around those little delicate flaps. So that's okay. I knew that I was probably popping this word up anyway, and I was going to create a separate word to pop up. But for now, I'm going to go with it, and I'm just testing out my color combination. And it's good that I did this because I don't like it all brown. So now I know that when I come to stencil my word that I'm going to die cut. And by the way, I learned my lesson. I'm going to use pixie spray. And I have a little sheet, a little scrap of paper, and just making sure it's big enough for the die. I don't need to use a whole piece of paper to stencil this because my grip mat is holding that little scrap. And then there's more surface area for my stencil to stick to the grip mat. So now I'm coming in with a blue color and I'm stenciling up this word. And it's a little brighter than I want, but I'm going to go ahead and make the shadow. And again, I was just kind of playing with color combinations that I had never played with before. So I'm coming in with this brown and just doing a shadow. Now you can do your shadow lighter than your base color or darker. I chose to make my shadows darker than the main color. So here I'm making my shadow, and you'll see it in a second. And then now that that's done, I'm going to use the matching die to cut it out. These stencils, by the way, they do come just as stencils themselves, but I have the bundle with the die. So I'm looking at it and I think the blue is just too bright. So I'm going to make it darker. Or I'm going to kind of muddy it up. I just want it to be more dull. So even though it's already die cut, I can still stencil because again, the die cut is sticking to my grip mat and I can place the stencil over it. Now, here's a big tip. Build up your color. Don't start dark. Start light. And you'll see what happens with my first pass here. That is way too dark. I did not mean to make this whole thing brown. But again, at that point I was married to it. I figured I would just finish it and see what it looked like. But yeah, it's a hot mess. I was not going for that. But that's okay. All right, here is the last stencil that I'm going to do. And I'm coming in and doing accents with that blue color again. And by the way, I'm going to have all ink colors listed on my blog. There will be a link to my blog in the description below. But this blue is from Hero Arts. So now I'm coming in with brown, and again, everywhere I have that blue, I'm just kind of dulling it up. All right, so now I am gluing all my die cuts, and you can see that I had several color attempts. This was the one that was too dark, the one above it was too light, and the one at the very top was the winner. And yes, it's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. But the top one was the winner. So now I'm not going to throw away those ones that I didn't like. I'm going to use them to layer up my die cut for dimension. So now it's all stacked up and ready to put on my card. And by the way, I cut the panel down a little bit and added it to kind of a grayish brown card base. And here I'm just using that die cut to cover up the mistake in the middle, and you'll never know. And there is the finished card. And because it's a masculine, well, I think it's a masculine card. I think it's a great option. I didn't add any embellishments. I think it's beautiful on its own. All right, next tip, hold your ink pads in place. Not just your stencils, but it's important to keep your ink pads in place. Now I'm using one of my grip mats, and somebody who watched my video on the waffle flower grip mats recently, they said something about maybe they would hold ink pads, and sure enough, look at that. You can just put your ink pads on these grip mats and they stay in place. And by the way, this is the Layered Joy Tree stencil and die bundle. This is probably my favorite of the three. This time I have cut my panel down to what I know the finished size is going to be, and you can see it gives this stencil more surface area around all sides to grip the mat. But now you can see that ink pad is not moving. And so as I'm stenciling, I don't have to constantly hold the ink pad every time I want to add more, ink up my brush. And again, it makes for faster stenciling and less frustration. So there's layer 1 of this stencil, and for this card I am using a set of Pinkfresh Studio browns. These are warmer browns than that first card. And this whole series of cards was me just playing around with different brown combinations, something I don't do very often. So there's the second one. And I decided I wanted more contrast between those two colors. So I'm just going to put my stencil back in place. And I can come back in with that same ink and just go heavier. And that's the great thing about stenciling, and that's also why you should start out light. You can always make it darker, but you cannot make it lighter. So here's the third stencil. And again, it's really easy to line these stencils up because the subsequent stencils always have parts that match up with the other stencils, even if you go out of order. So now I'm coming in with my third darkest color. And again, all these colors will be listed on my blog. So there it is coming into shape. I think this tree is so cool. And by the way, there'll be a surprise card at the end. So definitely stick with me to the end. So here is the next stencil, and you can see where that joy lines up in there. I will not be stenciling the joy this time. Again, I'm going to be popping it up. But here I'm masking again. I want to keep that joy area clear of any ink, just so it's nice and clean in case, I glue my die cut on crooked or something. So I decided that was dark enough. And here I am with the next stencil, and I'm covering up the star at the top. And I am inking up all these tiny components. See, I didn't have to use a small stencil. A small brush. You can use a bigger brush for smaller areas of a stencil. And now I decided, after looking at everything, I just wanted to darken up the trunk. So again, it's super easy to put my stencil back in place. Next tip, clean your stencils. And when your stencils are stained, you can use alcohol. So these browns had a lot of red in it. You can see my stencil. And as we know, red is the color of the devil. when it comes to ink anyway. So a really great way of cleaning your stencils is with isopropyl alcohol. And you can see, I'm going to pause it. Look at that. And I've always known this tip, but I was reminded at the Simon Create event. Gina K actually reminded me of this tip. So here I'm inking up my Joy, and I'm inking it separately because remember I'm going to die cut it. And I'm using this turquoise ink. Next tip is to blend your own colors. So you saw me on the last card kind of dulling up my color. So I'm going to do the same with this turquoise because it's just too bright. So I'm bringing in this brown and I'm just creating this more dull turquoise color. Not that any turquoise color could be dull because I just love them all. But it's really easy to make your own colors when you're stenciling. That's one of the fun things about stenciling is when you overlap one color with another, you're creating a new color. So here's the card. You can see I made the star turquoise as well, and we're finished with that card. These cards come together so easily and so quickly. And there you can see that pop of that die cut. All right, here's a tip. Flip your stencils over, so you can do a lot of techniques when you flip your stencils over. So you get kind of a reverse image, and you can use the backside of your stencils. In fact, you can do mirror designs when you do that, and it just gives you a different design. However, having said that, when you have stencils that have a word in them, you should probably pay attention to how you're stenciling up because you'll see in a second, these stencils actually have little numbers at the bottom. And I was not paying attention, but the numbers tell you which side is right up. Can you see what I did? Oops. My word would have been upside down because I was using the back side. And that's because I was hurrying and normally it would be no big deal. Here's the finished card. But again, normally it wouldn't be a big deal to have it backwards, but here are the 3 cards that I made, and I love them all, but look at this. Here's my surprise card. So here is that tree, and I had to do it in color. And you can see the one I did in color, I did not pop the word up, and it's just as beautiful. But yeah, I had to do one with all my signature colors. Last tip, add finishing details when you're done. There are lots of things you can do. For me, I'm just coming in with this shimmer pen and I'm going to add some sparkle to the star and then to all of the other little yellow components of my card. But there's lots of things you can do. You could come in with a white gel pen and add highlights. You could come in with a Copic marker to add detail. You could take one of the stencils and put it back over your design and add glimmer paste. So there you can see the shine and the star. And that's it for that card. I hope that this video has been helpful. A lot of these tips were just things that popped in my head as I was going along and like some of the mistakes I was making. I'm no expert by any means, but I've been stenciling long enough and, I still make mistakes. So I figured it was worth sharing some of my thoughts. Those are the 3 cards, and I love this collection. That one in the middle is my favorite by far, but they're all gorgeous. So I thank you for joining me today, and give me a like, and I have a lot more videos coming this week with Spellbinders products and a couple other surprises, so hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any. I hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.